The story of the Kennedy assassination was not merely one of a single, isolated act of violence. It was the culmination of decades of political maneuvering, ideological battles, and covert power struggles. As shadows of the Cold War lengthened across the globe, the United States found itself at the crossroads of history, its internal and external conflicts merging into a maelstrom of uncertainty. In dimly lit rooms behind closed doors, former intelligence operatives and disillusioned insiders whispered about operations that had extended far beyond the borders of legality. The Cold War, with its unyielding tension and a pervasive fear of communist infiltration, had given birth to a series of covert operations. Operations that in some quarters were deemed necessary evils. Yet, in the aftermath of Kennedy's demise, these very operations became the breeding ground for suspicion. Old photographs, yellowed memos, and carefully redacted files began to surface, each piece of evidence adding weight to a growing narrative that the assassination was not an act of spontaneous violence, but a meticulously planned operation orchestrated by a network of actors who spanned the spectrum of power. Central to many of the conspiracy theories was the role of the Central Intelligence Agency. For some, the very agency charged with protecting national security had, in fact, become the architect of chaos. Critics argued that Kennedy's policies, especially his perceived hesitance in confronting the Soviet threat and his enigmatic stance on Cuba, had sowed the seeds of dissent within the corridors of power. In hushed conversations held in smoke-filled back rooms, ex-agents recalled how Kennedy's approach had clashed with the hardliners, who believed that only a more aggressive strategy could preserve American dominance. The narrative took on a life of its own, that within the CIA, a rogue faction had decided that the only solution was to remove the commander-in-chief. In this version of events, Lee Harvey Oswald was less a lone wolf and more a carefully chosen pawn. His actions manipulated by unseen hands, directing the flow of fate from behind a curtain of secrecy. Documents and testimonies later brought into the spotlight detailed irregularities in the agency's operations, sudden reassignments of key personnel, unexplained gaps in the official records, and cryptic communications that hinted at deeper, darker motives. Was it possible that an agency built on the promise of vigilance had, in a twist of irony, become the harbinger of a national tragedy? Parallel to the allegations against the CIA were the persistent murmurings of organized crime's involvement. The Mafia, with its deep-rooted influence in American society, had long been a formidable force operating in the shadows. Underneath the veneer of respectability, its leaders wielded power through fear, bribery, and a network of corruption that reached the highest echelons of society. Kennedy's administration, emboldened by his brother Robert's vigorous crusade against organized crime, had struck a nerve in the underworld. It was said that the very mobsters who had once enjoyed a tacit alliance with political figures now saw their interests threatened. The assassination, in this account, was not a matter of ideological differences but a calculated act of retribution. Behind closed doors in secret meeting rooms, figures of the underworld are alleged to have plotted, setting in motion a chain of events that culminated in the tragic day on Elm Street. The narrative woven by Mafia theorists was rich with detail. Coded messages exchanged over payphones, discreet handshakes in darkened alleys, and the silent nods of men who had long mastered the art of concealment. Here the assassination was reimagined as a desperate act of self-preservation, a final fatal maneuver by those whose influence spanned, from the backroom gambling dens of New York to the smoggy streets of Chicago. Yet another strand in the tapestry of conspiracy theories pointed its accusing finger toward Cuba. The embers of the Cuban Revolution, which had ignited a fierce ideological battle in the Americas, were still smoldering in the early 1960s. Kennedy's policies toward Cuba, ranging from the ill-fated Bay of Pigs invasion to the subsequent missile crisis, had left both Cuban exiles and the revolutionary government reeling. For many, the assassination was a direct consequence of these turbulent events. Some theorists contended that factions within the Cuban government, possibly in collusion with anti-Castro elements residing in exile, had sought to strike back at a president whose policies had destabilized the region. The narrative here was as explosive as it was dramatic. Clandestine meetings in Havana, covert arms deals in Miami, and whispered negotiations that straddled the fine line between patriotism and treachery. In this version of events, Kennedy's assassination was the inadvertent fallout of a larger geopolitical game, a collision of revolutionary fervor and the stark realities of international politics. The Cuban angle, with its blend of idealism and ruthless pragmatism, added yet another layer of complexity to the already intricate mosaic of theories. As if the domestic players weren't enough, some narratives reached beyond American borders to implicate foreign intelligence agencies. Among these, the KGB, the formidable apparatus of the Soviet Union's intelligence, was frequently mentioned. In the charged atmosphere of the Cold War, every major political event was scrutinized for signs of international machinations, and the assassination of Kennedy was no exception. Proponents of the KGB theory argued that the Soviet Union, perceiving Kennedy's policies as a threat to its sphere of influence, might have orchestrated, or at least facilitated, a covert operation to destabilize the United States from within, although the evidence was circumstantial at best. The idea resonated deeply with those who believed that the struggle for global supremacy often spilled over into the most personal realms of national leadership. The narrative in this chapter is one of intrigue on an international scale, a story where the lines between domestic betrayal and international espionage blurred. Cryptic messages intercepted by intelligence agencies, unexpected trips to foreign capitals, and unexplained contacts with Soviet operatives lent credence, in the minds of some, to a theory that spanned continents and defied simple explanation. No further exploration of the Kennedy assassination could ignore the enduring mystery of the grassy knoll, a small hill in Dallas that quickly transformed into an iconic symbol of conspiracy. As investigators and independent researchers combed through reams of photographic evidence and eyewitness accounts, the knoll took on an almost mythical significance. Reports from that day described strange sounds and unusual movements that seemed to emanate from the direction of the knoll. Was it possible that a second shooter lurked in its shadows? Or could the knoll itself be seen as a silent sentinel, a witness to the unfolding tragedy, holding secrets that even time could not erase? In this chapter, the narrative becomes almost poetic, a meditation on the nature of truth and the elusive quality of memory. Every flickering frame of film and every grain of dust captured by high-resolution cameras was scrutinized, analyzed, and debated. The grassy knoll remained a fertile ground for speculation, its silent presence a reminder that sometimes, the most profound mysteries are hidden in plain sight. As the nation grappled with grief and disbelief, a parallel journey unfolded in the corridors of power and in the minds of determined investigators. The official inquiry, led by the Warren Commission, presented a version of events that many found both comforting in its simplicity and disturbing in its implications. Yet, from the very outset, discrepancies in the investigation, missed evidence, hurried conclusions, and suppressed testimonies planted the seeds of doubt. Independent researchers, journalists, and former insiders embarked on a relentless quest to uncover what the official records had left unspoken. This was a journey marked by late-night meetings in dingy offices, the careful examination of classified documents, and a tenacious refusal to accept a narrative that seemed on its face too neatly packaged. Their investigations were punctuated by moments of triumph, a piece of evidence discovered in a forgotten archive, a whistleblower willing to risk everything, and by crushing setbacks when leads evaporated into bureaucratic red tape. In the ensuing years, as the nation attempted to heal, the Kennedy assassination became a mirror reflecting the collective psyche of a people caught between hope and disillusionment. The official narrative, while comforting to some, was met with skepticism by a growing number of citizens who had witnessed, firsthand or through the lens of memory, the cracks in the facade of certainty. Debates raged in academic circles, on television talk shows, and in the hushed corridors of local diners. Every new piece of information, every newly declassified document or previously unheard testimony, was met with a flurry of interpretations. For some, the evidence pointed clearly toward an intricate conspiracy. For others, it reinforced the notion of a tragic, yet isolated, act of violence perpetrated by a troubled individual. A complex dance that continues to define public perception of the event. It is a dance choreographed by fear, hope, and the unyielding human desire for answers in the face of chaos. In this interplay, every whispered theory and every fervent declaration became part of a larger narrative, a mosaic of voices, each adding a unique shade to the canvas of history.